the Everything But Politics podcast.
Let's go, everybody. Here we are with an absolute legend in the health and wellness space, carnivore connoisseur, we'll call him, the legend himself, Dr. Shawn Baker. Welcome to our show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this. Should be fun.
Yeah, and Shawn, like I said to you over email, so this past week, Evan and I have been practicing this carnivore diet that you've been very vocal about. We had 6 ingredients or 6 things we consumed or put into our bodies. It was red meat, eggs, butter, salt, black coffee, and water. And I feel very good. So usually I will eat pretty good during the week, and honestly, I will kind of falter off during the weekend. Eat not a big sweet guy, but maybe like some fried food, or that's pretty much the vice is fried food. But this past 7 days, only red meat and eggs. I've lost. So when we started, I was at 174. This morning, got on the scale at 166, and I wasn't trying to lose weight, but this is nature's Ozempic. It's very impressive what's happened in 7 days.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you made that analogy because in many ways it's true. If we look at, if you guys want to go into, I don't know how interested your listeners may be, but it's interesting because Ozempic is a drug that mimics something called GLP-1, which is what's technically called an incretin hormone. And these things live in our gut. They're produced by the lower part of our gut, something called the ileum. And one of the most potent stimulators naturally of GLP-1 is actually beef isolate. Beef isolate profoundly stimulates those the GLP-1 the cells to produce that in a natural way, in a way it's supposed to be designed. The drugs unfortunately slow down the gut, but you don't digest things in the way they're supposed to be digested. It can lead to, certainly weight loss, but there's some negative consequences. So it's kind of like the Ozempic without the side effects in many ways, as you guys probably experience. And to be fair, some of that weight probably would have been water, would be my guess, particularly early on, just because you tend to lower your insulin levels a little bit, and that in turn causes the kidneys not to hang on to as much salt and water. So, but it sounds like you said you felt pretty good, and I don't know if Evan had the same experience or not, but maybe he'll share his.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about mine. Was around 185, 184, and got to about 179. But I feel like it might have went even lower the first day or two and then shot up a little. But aside from like the water weight, where else is that weight drop coming from?
Well, some of it is going to be a couple things. It's funny, we hear people talking about meat sitting in your gut and rotting. That's actually not what's going on. It's actually meat is fully absorbed, and so when you fill your guts full of plant fibers, that sits around. So you get maybe a half pound of that sitting in your colon at any given time. Obviously, the water weight is something. You probably lost a little bit of body fat too. There's certainly that can occur. So it's a combination of all those things. And water's probably like that early on. Water's going to be the majority of it. But I get people that lose 100 pounds. It ain't all water weight. I can tell you that.
And something I feel like I was missing was like the fruit aspect. Now, how often, if ever, are you incorporating fruit into your diet?
Yeah, I don't do it with any regularity at all. I don't find it to be necessary for me to perform well, and even as an athlete, I don't find it to be necessary. I did a little experiment with fruit about 3 months ago, just trying to see how it would alter my cholesterol. And it wasn't so much fruit; it was just carbohydrates in general. But I generally don't include them. It's, my diet. I'm not religious about this. I'm not like some, oh my God, there's a piece of chive on my steak or something like that. Or I guess maybe not chive, maybe, I don't know, rosemary or something like that. It might be more appropriate. But in the 8 years I've been doing this diet, my diet is probably 95% red meat, usually in the form of some kind of steak or ground beef, eggs, seafood, a little bit of dairy products. And then, maybe, less than maybe 2 or 3 times a year, I might have something that's not quote unquote carnivore, not an animal product. So it might be a piece of fruit, might be a piece of cake for that matter. And again, I don't get too hung up on that, but I just don't really want this stuff. I mean, it's kind of weird. You get to a point where you don't care about it. You don't really feel like you need it. I can see where it's appealing, and a lot of people that do this diet end up going quote unquote animal based, where they feel like they can eat fruit. I feel a lot of those people end up dropping that later when they find out it hasn't worked for them. But I mean, I'm not here to say, what's perfect for everybody, because, you got to find that out for yourself.
Well, and another interesting thing about it was you could eat a whole 16-ounce ribeye, whatever, and 5 eggs, and you don't feel like blah after
Right.
eating it, and you have no desire to continue eating. Whereas sometimes you have like a pasta dish, and 5 minutes later you could keep going and going. Same could be said about dessert or fried foods. Why is once you complete or finish your steak and eggs, you're just satisfied and you have no desire to continue eating?
Well, I mean, I think it's in part, it's because it's nourishment is pretty well designed for us. I mean, it's interesting because often we're used to feeling ourselves digest food. I mean, you get a little bit of, your stomach's rumbling, maybe you get a little bloat, maybe a little gas. That's abnormal in my view. You wouldn't accept discomfort or any kind of pain in any other organ system in the body. I mean, if your lungs hurt when you breathe, if your chest hurt when you started running, if your back or your knees hurt when you move, those are all problems. But yet we are sort of led to believe that discomfort with digestion is quote unquote normal. It's because everybody does it. It's so common. But when we're eating foods that we are not designed for in a way, then we have these discomfort issues. And I think that's a lot of it has to do with fermentable foods, sugars, even plant fibers in some cases. That becomes a problem. As far as the satiety is concerned, our gut is perfectly designed to absorb meat. I mean, this is what it's set up for. We have this extremely acidic stomach environment, pH of about 1.5. We have a very long small intestine, which is purely set up to absorb meat, and it does very well. I mean, you look at people who've had their colon removed who end up, going to the bathroom in a bag. When they consume meat, nothing comes out. When they consume fruits and vegetables, it all comes out. So it all goes into the colon, where it is then sort of rotted, that's a nice way to say fermented, or a bad way to say fermented rather. And you have to have a microbiome dialed in for that to be effective. And so you're kind of dependent upon, do I have the right microbiome? With meat, you don't need one. You literally don't even need a microbiome, because it's all absorbed before it even gets there. So that's, in part why that is. And, I think that it's literally very viscerally and primitively satisfying. And I think the reason for that is in a way how we evolved as a species. I mean, this is what drove our large brain development. You think about it, if fruits and things like that were so critical for our development and, our brain size, given that, well, the monkeys have been doing that for 25 million years, and they're still hanging out in the trees with small brains, eating all the fruit they want. Their brain didn't develop. And it's because we had this, we were forced into a different dietary pattern that allowed for that significant brain growth, going from, a monkey's got about a chimp's got about a 350, 400 cc brain. Ours is 1,300, 1,400. So we've more than tripled our brain size because of the access to that proper nutrition.
And a great point I heard you make. I think it was on your first go around on Rogan, was that back even now, but like hundreds, thousands of years ago in Alaska in the wilderness, you weren't finding a fruit or a vegetable anywhere. You needed to have meat, and that's kind of what has fueled humans for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah, if you look at if we talk about geographic diversity, what species occupy which niches in the world, humans are the most diverse species. I mean, of mammals, we live pretty much everywhere. Cold weather, I mean, can't live underwater, but I mean, we're up in the mountains, we're up in the desert, we're in the jungle, we're everywhere, right? And the reason is because our food supply was also accessible everywhere. Now, if you tell me we need to consume certain plants and fruits and vegetables, where are they growing that they can grow everywhere in the world? There's none. There's none. I mean, the closest you would get to is grass, which we can't consume, or at least we can't consume and get any significant nutrition out of it. So the reason we've been geographically diverse is because we can pretty much eat every animal that is around. Any animal is on the menu. Now, some taste better than others, and some are harder to catch and kill. The second most geographically diverse creature on the planet is the wolf. And, you think about what does a wolf eat? I mean, and there's a reason why I've got my dogs in the room with me, but we domesticated those animals. They have been symbiotic to us. They helped us to hunt. They eat a very similar diet to what we were designed to eat and do eat. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that a meat-based diet has its significant advantages. And outside of just talking about, what happened, what may or may not have happened 100,000, 50,000, a million years ago, we can see it today. I mean, as you guys know, I mean, there are literally at this point hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people doing a carnivore diet. And pretty consistently, most people note a significant amount of improvement in their health. I mean, particularly people that are suffering from, you name it, X, Y, or Z, and they usually get better in many cases.
Absolutely. And Shawn, I want to ask, how important is like grass fed to grain fed? I hear like people say you should do grass fed, but in terms of health wise, is it that significant?
No, it's not. I mean, there are some very, and I'll go as far as saying regeneratively produced meat versus sort of otherwise. That has an important implication for biodiversity and environmental issues. But as far as human health is concerned, I've seen no compelling data that makes me say that you need to eat grass finished versus grain finished. Yes, there are nutritional differences, just like there's differences between different breeds of cattle and sexes of cattle. What impacts what goes into the final package is the age of the cow, the sex of the cow, the breed of the cow, where it's raised, what time it was slaughtered. All those things are going to impact all of those things. So it's not just grass finished versus grain finished. And what I have, there's been essentially two studies of any significance that looked at human outcomes comparing grass finished versus grain finished. One was done by Texas A&M University about 10 years ago. They fed some people some grass finished burger meat and some grain finished burger meat, and they compared a bunch of biomarkers. Really no significant difference. In fact, the grain finish actually did a little quote unquote better. They had higher HDL and a few other things that we might consider better. And the other one was a study that was done in Australia where they compared grain-finished beef to kangaroo meat, which is kind of a weird comparison because it's not even the same animal. And they found that the grain-finished beef had a little bit higher postprandial or post-meal inflammation, which really doesn't even mean anything as far as I know. I asked Harvard University when they did the study on carnivore to ask that question specifically, and they found no difference in outcomes. I did a survey of 12,000 people on the diet, again, specifically asking grain finished, grass finished, and again, no difference in outcomes. So from a health standpoint, it probably doesn't matter. Individually, some people will say, yeah, I feel better when I eat grain finished, or yeah, I feel better when I eat grass finished. You can try it out and see what feels what feels best to you. But for someone to say you must eat grass finished beef in order to be successful in a carnivore diet is just simply not true. There are so many people that all they can afford is to go to Walmart and get the big tubes of ground beef, and they put their diabetes in remission. They lose a bunch of weight. They lose their depression in many cases. So it's not as important as some people would lead you to believe, and probably is not important at all. However, I still say this. I think it's important that we support local rancher. I think it's important that those guys that are practicing agriculture in a regenerative way are I shouldn't say subsidized, or are basically supported to the extent that we can.
And have you tasted a difference from grass to grain if you ever
Yeah, oh
tried
yeah, of
them out?
course. Yeah, for sure. I mean, the thing about grain finishing an animal is they got it down. The science of that is down. I mean, they know how to do it, and it's consistent very, very commonly. I mean, right now in the US, I think something like 85% of the beef supply either grades out at prime or choice, which is pretty good. I mean, that's pretty damn good. It's better than anywhere else in the world. And that is a big improvement from where it was, say, in the 1970s and so on and so forth. So you're going to get a consistent product with grain finished beef pretty routinely because they know how to do it. With grass finish, it's hit or miss. It depends on how good they are at finishing it. It depends on the cattle breed. It depends on how long they run it for. I've had some really, really good grass finished beef, but likewise, I've had some grain finished or grass finished beef where I would be like, I don't know if I'd get that one again. So yeah, I mean, they do definitely taste different.
Shawn, you've been one of the most outspoken voices in this carnivore realm, but I'm curious as to who was Shawn Baker before he became full carnivore?
Well, I mean, I was an orthopedic surgeon. I mean, I was a doctor just plugging along in my career. I fully intended to just operate until I was 75 years old and retired, like so many other surgeons do. I mean, of course, I was an athlete. I've always been an athlete. I was competing in I'm very competitive. I was, I mean, if you go into my history, I mean, I was in the military for a number of years. I came in twice. The first time I was launching nuclear bombs for my living. That was my job. And of course, we didn't really do that, but I was trained to do that. And then the second time I came back in as a surgeon. So I was kind of a trauma surgeon over in Afghanistan, and then just, my day-to-day orthopedic practice. And so I've got 4 kids. So I'm a dad, I'm a dad, a husband, I've been a surgeon. I've always been an athlete. And so that's kind of who I was, or who I am still.
And when did you kind of become active on social media, start podcasting? I mean, you post some great content trolling the vegans. I mean, the whole thing, your social media is very well set up.
For the longest time, I think this is, back in the early 2000s when Facebook was, I don't remember what time of year it came, but I thought it was the stupidest stuff in the world. It was like such a waste of time. And oh God, who spends their time looking at stupid pictures of cats and stuff like that all day? 2015, I got on Twitter just for a reason. And, my account slowly grew a little bit. I had, I want to say about 3,000 people following me. So nowhere to near the extent it is today, but I had enough people to make it interesting. When I went on Carnivore at the very first time in 2016, and I remember saying, "Hey guys, I'm going to do this all meat." It wasn't even called Carnivore at the time. I said, I'm going to do an all meat diet for 30 days. And I mean, for sure I'm going to die, but it's just, what am I going to die of? Am I going to, am I going to have a heart attack? My arteries are immediately going to clog up, or I'm going to get scurvy, or my colon's going to fall out from lack of fiber. And we kind of goofed around. I remember doing took a little survey, and I can't remember what the results are. I think most people said I would die of scurvy, but none of it happened. And, I actually felt, like I said, this is the thing that I thought people were crazy back then that did an all meat diet. I thought they're nutty, but I followed them for about a year, and then on social media. And then I decided I would try it. And I was like, maybe some of you guys might have felt it. I really felt good. I mean, I was just about turned 50 at the time. And because I've been an athlete my whole life, I got some hard miles on me. I mean, professional rugby, Highland Games, powerlifting. I went pretty hard on my body, so I had some aches and pains. And about 30 days in, I was like, wow, I feel like really good. I don't ache as much anymore, which is really cool to me. And I did that 30 days, went back to a regular diet, immediately felt worse, and said, I don't like feeling bad, and went back on the diet. And then, of course, about a year into that, Joe Rogan got me on his show, and obviously that changes things significantly. And then every vegan on the planet started wishing me death and thinking I was the worst guy in the world. Just because I was saying, hey, I think meat's a good idea, and I got healthy on it. And of course, that doesn't sort of jive with their belief system and their narrative. So now I became one of the main vegan enemies, I suppose, I guess.
But why are they so radical about it? I mean, in your approach, if they want to be vegan, so be it, enjoy your life. Why do they hate so harshly upon you and other carnivores?
Well, because they think they're defending helpless animals. I mean, that's their whole belief system. And I think what I do is akin to slavery, is akin to a Holocaust or something, that I'm sort of causing grave harm to billions of animals. I mean, if you think about what we eat every year, we clearly consume many, many billions of animals, which, I mean, it's kind of funny because, in the United States, we go through about 30 million head of cattle a year. That's what gets on our plate, and a bunch of chickens, about 9 billion chickens. But cats in the United States, domestic house cats, kill like 25 billion animals a year, just little house cats. So they're worse than we are, And so it's like, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of things that die. I mean, every day, with pesticides alone in this country, there are something like 4 quadrillion, not a billion, not a trillion, but a quadrillion number of small things that are killed every year with pesticides just to support crop agriculture. And, they seem to totally ignore that because they're hyper-focused on a certain subset of the animal population that they feel they need to defend, even though that population probably could care less about them. In fact, they don't care. And in many cases, their life is better, particularly when it comes to grazing animals like cows and sheep. They actually have a much better quality of life and a longer life for most of them, even in the food supply. Because, there's a great study out of University of Pennsylvania did on white-tailed deer a few years back where they tagged a bunch of, newborn deer and followed them around, and they found that something like 60% of them didn't even make it to 30 weeks of age because they were either eaten by a bear or a coyote or froze to death or, something happened, infection or something like that. Whereas the cattle that we produce, even as beef, almost all of them make it to at least 2 years. It's just like, it's like they have a better quality of life.
And Shawn, it seems like you're one of the only doctors who actually is in good shape, which is kind of funny for America. Is that a common thing you get asked or talked about? How most doctors are not as healthy as maybe they want their patient to be?
Well, I mean, that's, it's not all down to diet for sure. I mean, I exercise. I mean, I'm doing that my whole life. I think that's part of it. I don't, when I talk to people, it's, hey, eat, stop eating garbage, get some quality protein, get some decent sleep, don't be sedentary. And then if you can, train and get after it. And so I try to walk the walk. Everything I talk about, I do myself. I think it's kind of hypocritical to say, do this, and yet you're unable to do it. Either that advice is bad or the advice is useless if you can't even do it. So, I mean, like I said, if you can't at least display some evidence of what you're talking about in your own life, then I think you lose a lot of credibility. So, I mean, some people say, hey, you can be a great coach and be a sucky player. That's true. But there's a point where credibility comes into view. There's not a lot of people lining up to go to a dentist with crooked teeth or a barber with a messed up haircut. And I don't think it should be any different for somebody dispensing some level of health advice. And again, what I'm interested in is getting people healthy, not necessarily dealing with sick care, which is what the healthcare system has devolved into. And I don't know what your listeners are like, age range and stuff like that. But I got very frustrated with the healthcare system for a number of reasons. The incentives are not so much about getting people healthy or keeping people from being sick. It's mostly about kind of chronically keeping people medicated in a perpetual state of disease, and doing symptom management, which is very profitable for both the pharmaceutical industry and the hospital systems itself and the insurance industry. So the whole thing is enormously profitable because we have sick people and because we only sort of manage their symptoms. And so like I said, instead of just like, raising my fist and screaming at the TV set, like, you see, I said, we got to do something about it. I formed a company called Revero, and we do just that. We literally get people off meds and, address the root cause of their issues and hopefully heal them up and, get them so they don't need that stuff anymore, which is, I think, how healthcare should be done.
Agreed. And something Paul Saladino has been outspoken about is that a lot of these doctors, they don't know what they're doing is necessarily wrong. This is just the way they've been taught. This is the way the system's been for a long time. At what point in your professional career did you realize, hey, this is a little backwards?
Yeah, about 10, 11 years ago. I remember, as an orthopedic surgeon, I would do a lot of, hip replacements, knee replacements. And a lot of those patients, if they were obese, would have higher rates of complications. They would be more likely to get blood clots. They'd be more likely to have wound infections. They'd be more likely not to rehab as well. And so as a collective community of orthopedic surgeons, we said, hey, we're going to try not to operate on so many obese people. And if we have an obese patient, we need to do what we can to have them lose weight prior to authorizing their surgery. And we all agreed to that. And, there was no real, like, here's how you do it. It was just like, just make them lose weight, right? And so my strategy at the time was to put people on a very low carb, even a ketogenic diet at times. And I got pretty darn good results with that. I got, not everybody would do the diet, of course, but the ones that did, very often I would see them back about 2 weeks after I told them to start the diet. And a lot of the patients would come in and say, hey, you know what, doc? I know I'm on the schedule for a knee replacement, but my knee doesn't hurt anymore. And that was like a big light bulb going off in my head. I said, well, look, your x-rays look really bad. I've got you on the OR schedule, but if your knee doesn't hurt, there's no point in the surgery, because the point of the surgery is to get you out of pain. So to me, that was exciting because by that time I'd done, thousands of surgeries. It was like another day of the office, another day, another surgery. I didn't really get that much excitement out of it, but I was really excited about this. And I brought it to the attention of the hospital administration. I said, hey guys, this is really cool. Let me take like a half day a week to start talking to people about lifestyle and nutrition. And the hospital basically said, no, hell no. And we don't want you doing that, which really sort of like shocked me. I was like, I'm actually helping people to avoid surgery. That was not what they want. They want me to do as many surgeries as I possibly can because that's where they generate the money. So that was the first indicator to me that the healthcare system was, their incentives are unfortunately not aligned with what's best for the interest of the patients.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. And you mentioned your business that is trying to make a difference. We actually had Sage Workinger on our podcast, who is the wife of Gary Brecker at 10X Health. How is your company similar to 10X Health, where they try to give you supplements and avoid medicine per se?
Well, I don't exactly know 10X Health, to be honest.
Okay.
I've heard of it, but I don't know exactly what they do, so I can't say for sure. I can tell you what we do. We take people with metabolic conditions like obesity, diabetes, hypertension, autoimmune diseases, so things like psoriasis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, rheumatoid arthritis, and inflammatory conditions like arthritis. And we see, first of all, if they're appropriate for what we do. If somebody's not willing to change their lifestyle, then we can't really help them. So we kind of start with that. We have a team of doctors that will evaluate them for appropriateness, order the necessary diagnostics. We provide day-to-day feedback through biometric screening, and we have an entire coaching staff dedicated to helping these people succeed. We have, I meet with all the patients. I meet with them once a week to kind of motivate them, and then we just basically get people off their meds. I mean, it's just a matter of, it's not necessarily that hard to do in a way. I mean, we've collected data on thousands upon thousands of people with various conditions and finding out what things nutritionally are less likely to be a problem versus a different condition. So like a person with psoriasis may have different nutritional, I guess I'll call them triggers, compared to somebody with, say, depression, right? So there's differences there, I mean, that you can kind of sort of utilize to sort of bring people to improving their health. And then we also have a dedicated research team. So we will be collecting data and publishing data on our outcomes to hopefully, again, further show, what's possible.
That's great. And so, Shawn, I'm going to give you a hypothetical, and you tell me what you would do as this person's physician. Say you're on one of these calls, you have a person with type 2 diabetes, few 100 pounds overweight. Like you said, you want to take more of the holistic route. What advice would you give to that person to start things off?
Well, I mean, a few 100 pounds overweight is significant. I mean, that's,
Okay.
your class 3, class 4 obesity or something like that. But we see those patients, and I've seen them. I mean, they didn't get there by accident. And there's a lot of psychological stuff that's on board on top of that. And so I think, first of all, you have to realize that most of them have already tried to lose weight various ways. Some of them tried surgeries or lap bands or drugs or, you name it. They probably dieted and tried all of those things. And I think what I have found, irrespective of whatever condition I may be treating someone for, and I do still do lifestyle consultations one-on-one myself, just as because I like doing it. It's still fun for me, even though I don't do that day to day as part of the company. I talk to people about, hey, we've got to figure out, because you have a maladaptive relationship with food. I mean, you're eating for non-nutritive reasons. You're eating because you're traumatized, you're stressed out, you're bored, you are, you're habituated to it. Maybe you have all this social pressure to do it. Maybe, you prey to the propaganda that's out there. I mean, the man on the TV told me to eat it, and you can't stop. So that's something they have to realize. They have to fix that problem because, anybody can lose weight. I've talked to people that have lost and gained hundreds of pounds over and over again, because they can do it, and then they put it back on. So you've got to figure out how to beat that eventually, because the diabetes is another aspect of that will come in. But, even someone who is 200 pounds overweight is arguably malnourished, and you wouldn't think so. You're thinking, well, they got too much nourishment. Well, they've got too much calories on board, but they're probably lacking in many critical nutrients they're not getting, and that's what causes many people to overeat, is because the food they're consuming is so unnourishing that they just have to continue to eat and eat and eat until they get satiated. And that's why remember what you guys were saying. When I ate all this steak and eggs, I just was full. I mean, I felt satisfied without having to wait till my stomach stretched to, at 3 times its normal size. So some of that is, you've got to fix their physiology, and that's by nourishing them appropriately. And that may take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months or a year before that actually sort of normalizes. And then there's a psychological aspect of it, and that's something that I talk about. I mean, like cravings. What do you do with a craving? Well, what's your plan? What do you mean my plan? Well, you got to have a plan, right? If you don't have a plan, failure to plan is planning to fail, right?
Yep.
So I talk about what's your plan when you have a craving. That first of all, that gets their attention because I didn't think about plan. I just react, right? So I mean, and knowing the physiology of cravings, when people find out that a craving is usually related to often a surge in something called ghrelin, which is an appetite hormone that drives appetite, and they know that it only lasts 30 to 45 minutes, then you're like, okay, now we can deal with it because it's going to happen. I mean, if you guys were to persist with a carnivore diet, I don't know, day 17, 26, whatever, you develop some cravings, then you'd be like, what am I doing in this situation? Well, what can you do for 30 to 45 minutes? It's not shoving cookies in your mouth, right? So you think about alternatives. And it might be going for a walk. It might be exercising. It might be eating something else that's more appropriate. It might be consuming a lot of fluid to stretch those mechanoreceptors out so that, you're not so hungry. So, I mean, there's different ways you can do that. But I mean, clearly a type 2 diabetic, that is almost purely a lifestyle issue. And so, yeah, obesity is certainly attached to that. And as they get leaner, they'll see improvement in their blood glucose. But even in the absence of significant weight loss, we can see people's hyperglycemia and, high blood sugar start to normalize. And I've seen that sometimes within a matter of weeks, days to weeks. You can see somebody go from a super high blood glucose to a normal blood glucose. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is depending on how severe of a diabetic they are, if they're on a bunch of medications, say if they're on insulin, then you have to go a little bit cautious about how you withdraw people. You might have to taper people into this stuff. And that's why, again, our company is set up because you have a physician that can oversee those things. Because if somebody's on type 2 diabetic on insulin and they suddenly just drop all the carbs out of their diet, they may go hypoglycemic. And, some of them, I mean, if you get low enough, I mean, you could precipitate a coma, I mean, it can be an issue. So you just have to have some level of intelligent oversight to help you with that.
That's fascinating. And I guess something else that's fascinating and that's kind of taking our country by storm right now is Ozempic, Mounjaro, all these things that are becoming so mainstream. What's your opinion on all these drugs? And it's being really abused by people that don't even have these chronic issues. So, but you as a doctor, what do you think of all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think they will benefit a percentage of the population, but you are right. It's being wildly used inappropriately. I mean, there are no free lunches. I don't care. I mean, some people call it like, their willpower in a shot or whatever. It will come back to bite people, I mean, in the end, because if you are okay with being on drugs the rest of your life, then this might be an approach for you. Now, again, granted, maybe you're like the 1 in 8 or so people that has significant side effects where they're forced to stop. And some of those side effects, by the way, can be catastrophic. Some people die. Some people have permanent gastroparesis where they can no longer, easily digest food. They might have bowel obstructions. There might be some incidents of pancreatic cancer, thyroid cancers, suicidality. All these things are there. I mean, granted, the incidence is low-ish, but probably higher than what the drug companies report because they always report the side effects. And physicians on the street are seeing these things coming in. They're seeing a lot of people showing up in the ER with intractable vomiting or bowel obstructions and so on and so forth. And the other thing that's interesting is that there is this concept of fat cell hyperplasia. And so when you take one of these, these drugs, particularly in a high enough dose, the fat cells reproduce. You actually get more fat cells. Now they're small and insulin sensitive. And so the fat mass goes down, but the cellularity goes up. So you end up with smaller, but more fat cells with an overall reduction in size. And that's fine while you're on the drug. But what happens when you come off the drug? Let's say you have to come off the drug because you can't afford it. Let's say your insurance company stops paying for it. Let's say you start having side effects. Now you literally have more fat cells than when you started, right? And now your appetite starts coming back because you can't be on these drugs anymore. And then you start eating, and all of a sudden you're fatter than you started out with. So I think you're going to see a lot of people, 5 years out that are going to really regret having done this. And like I said, there's just no free lunches. You've got to at some point come to terms with your food addiction and figure out how to eat correctly. And the drugs aren't going to get you. The drugs aren't going to do it. Some people say, well, it helps me to get over the edge, and then I can adopt a healthy lifestyle. And that may be true for some people. But like I said, why don't you just do it in the first place? And you don't have to risk the side effects because you don't know. I mean, it's like rolling the dice a little bit. It's like, I don't know, am I the 1 in 8 guy that's going to develop something that's going to make me quit? And we don't know down the road what's going to happen. Maybe we'll find out who knows what's going to happen with these drugs. I mean, it's interesting, as long as a drug is making billions of dollars, it's going to be safe and effective, right? Because it's making so much damn money. So it doesn't matter what's going on. They're going to say it's good because they're making so much money at it. And eventually, maybe enough people die, enough people have horrible side effects where some lawsuits, maybe there's some class action suits. Maybe Novo Nordisk pays a $5 billion fine, which sounds like a lot, but it's literally they get that out of their spare change drawer. I mean, they built that into the cost. They already know and plan that they're going to get sued, and it's going to be a slap on the wrist, and no one's going to go to jail, and no one's going to lose their job, and the shareholders are still going to be happy. And they're going to, like I said, they're going to take it out of their pocket change to pay it off while all these other people have inappropriately gotten sick or even died. So like I said, I'm not a big fan of really drugs in general, with rare exception. I think most of them are unnecessary or could be unnecessary if we just took the care to do what's right and stop poisoning ourselves.
And Shawn, in what scenario would you recommend these drugs to someone?
Well, I mean, again, it's one of those things that if someone has failed every other lifestyle intervention, and they were I certainly would never recommend it for somebody who wants to lose 20 pounds for a wedding or a vacation in 2 months. That's just stupid. I mean, that's just ridiculous. If you got somebody who's literally extremely morbid and has all kinds of health issues attached to their obesity, and they've tried everything to include, even a carnivore diet from my understanding. And the caveat would be that this is intended to be as a temporary thing with intensive lifestyle support, with adequate protein and certainly adequate resistance training, because we know another one of the concerns is the potential for significant lean mass. And when you lose lean mass, whether it be skeletal mass, muscle mass, organ mass, or whatever, you further cause yourself to be sicker with regard to overall metabolic health and susceptibility to disease and so on and so forth. So like I said, I would suggest that the vast minority of people would ever qualify for something like this drug.
Well, Shawn, let's shift gears here. I'm sure this is something you get asked about all the time, but why are we told that high cholesterol is a bad thing?
Well, because there's a lot of associational data that shows that it is. I mean, it's, like I said, there are clear associations between heart disease and cholesterol. I think it is a dependent variable. I'm talking about diet. I'm talking about serum cholesterol, not necessarily dietary cholesterol, which back in 2015, they realized that dietary cholesterol had no bearing on that. But if you have high cholesterol in your blood, that's part of the equation. It's like having a fire, right? So if I were to build a fire, I'd need a couple of ingredients. I would need something to burn, like wood, right? Like something I'm going to burn. I'm going to need an environment that supports it, so an oxygen-rich environment. And then I'm going to need like a spark, some kind of flame to start the fire. So without those three things in place, you can have all the wood you want in the world. If there's no oxygen or there's no fire, it's not going to start a fire. There's no spark, right? And I think that's the same thing with cholesterol. If you have high cholesterol and there is some level of metabolic disease, maybe some level of vascular inflammation, then it's a problem. And by getting that cholesterol down very low, you can prevent some of that. That clearly can occur. What we don't, know is, or we can't explain well, in my view, is that there are many, 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 many people with very high cholesterol that do not develop heart disease, or certainly don't develop it early, as would be expected. So the question is, well, I mean, the thought in my mind is cholesterol is a dependent variable. So yes, it's an issue depending on these other things being in place. Now, there are people in the cardiology world that says it doesn't matter what else is going on. High cholesterol is high cholesterol, and you best damn get it down as low as possible. Even though there are people that have had high cholesterol for their whole lives and never developed heart disease, and they can't explain those people very well. And we're seeing more and more data sort of figuring out why that is. And it may be just as important as to why your cholesterol is high as the fact that it is high. And so what do I mean by that? Well, if your body is just, you're full of energy, like your cells are all stuffed full of fat and glycogen, and you're just full, and you keep eating, and then it's got nowhere to go. It's just going to circulate around and around, and it can't be utilized. That high cholesterol, same thing with high blood glucose, is probably an issue. Now, let's look at another scenario. Let's say you are not stuffed full of energy. Let's say you're very lean, and your glycogen is low, and you don't have a lot of body fat, you don't have a lot of visceral fat. Then you have a lot of energy being moved around, from the liver. The liver's making all this stuff. It's converting anything you eat into fats and glucose and other energy sources. Then in that situation, it's probably, or it seems to be, not as big of an issue. So this is a so-called lipid energy model that my friend Dave Feldman had developed and has published on. There's numerous papers now that show that, again, there was a great meta-analysis done by Adrian Sotomoda out of Monterey Tech early this year in January of 2024, looking at people on low-carb diets and what predicts if you're on a low-carb diet, what's going to predict whether your LDL cholesterol goes up or not. And the largest, by far, the biggest predictor was not how much saturated fat you ate or anything like that. The biggest predictor was how lean you were. The leaner you were, the more likely you were to have high cholesterol. And that perfectly lines up with this lipid energy model. Because if I'm very lean and I don't have a lot of glucose to use, my body's going to say, hey, we got to get you energy, so we're going to traffic fat. And the question is, in that scenario, does that high cholesterol lead to premature heart disease? And that answer is being answered by a guy named Matt Budoff, who's a cardiologist at UCLA. And he's published his preliminary data, or he's presented his preliminary data to a conference. They've got the 1-year data, but basically what they found was they took 100 people, all of which had ridiculously high cholesterol. We're talking, LDL cholesterol, normally they like it under 190, but their LDL cholesterol was 300, 400, 500, 600, like 3 or 4 times higher than the top of normal. And these people did not have any heart disease after 5 years in the diet based on a really high level CT angiography, which shows things very nicely. And in fact, there was no correlation at all between those with the highest LDL cholesterol who had, any kind of cardiovascular disease. So it's being called into question right now, and I think for good reason. So I think we'll have more data. Hopefully by the end of this summer, we should have some more data on this stuff.
In your opinion, do you believe that these people with high cholesterol, that their brains essentially have built a resilience towards it and just kind of have to figure out a way to live with high cholesterol?
Yeah, well, I mean, we always can adapt chronically. Our bodies are wonderfully adaptive to various things. And I think the other the other thing is more appropriate, asking people how their brain still works with low cholesterol. Our brain makes our own cholesterol, just so you guys know that. I mean, our brain is actually unique in that it can produce its own cholesterol. But I mean, cholesterol is incredibly important to the body as part of the immune. It's every cell in our body, every cell membrane relies on having adequate cholesterol to form. It's a precursor for a lot of our hormones, vitamin D, all of our sex hormones. It has a tremendous role in particularly the lipoproteins, which are things that carry the cholesterol in the immune system. And so, when you have low cholesterol, it's associated with higher rates of infectious diseases. It's associated with things like suicidality, depression, and violence. It's associated in some cases with higher rates of cancer. So, I mean, the cholesterol is there for a reason. And, the thought that we need to get it as low as possible, which is what's being pushed right now, because the average total cholesterol used to be 220, right? 220 milligrams per deciliter back in the 1960s. It's now dropped by 20 points down to 200, which is significant on a population level. And there has been no decrease in the incidence of any of these diseases. In fact, they've gone up. So the question is, well, why is it if we're moving in the right direction, but the disease are going in the wrong direction? Well, the answer to them is, well, we just got to get it lower and lower. We got to get it down to newborn baby level, right? And it's kind of funny. I mean, I said, well, if you want it, the level of so you want us to emulate something that has never eaten before, right? Because newborn babies, when they're first born, have not eaten a meal yet, right? And they take their blood and their LDL cholesterol is 20. Interestingly, there's studies on this that show that when babies start eating and when they're breastfed, particularly breastfed babies, their cholesterol will go from 20 to over 200 in the course of about 3 months, right? Wow. Strictly on breast milk. And so if you're saying that now breast milk is dangerous for humans because their LDL cholesterol goes up, I think you have to reevaluate where you're coming from, because you think about it. Why would drinking breast milk as a baby be a risk factor for cardiovascular disease? I mean, it makes no sense in that regard. So, I mean, I don't know what the optimal level of LDL cholesterol. There's a nice study out of Korea where they looked at almost 13 million people, which is one of the biggest studies ever done. And they found that a total cholesterol between 210 and 240 was most predictive of living the longest. So that's not in line with what we're being told about getting it down below, whatever, 190 or even lower in many cases.
Yeah, and Shawn, most of the things you talk about, you wouldn't even know unless you got blood work. How often do you get blood work, and how often should people get their blood done?
Well, I mean, again, I'm kind of interesting in that I'm not as excited about blood work as some other people are, because one thing I know is it changes every day. I mean, literally the blood you take tomorrow will be different than blood work you take on Friday and on Sunday. It changes a lot. I mean, I literally had my cholesterol move almost 200 points in 18 hours, right? So, I mean, I remember I got back from a ski trip and I checked my cholesterol. I got a home cholesterol reading. It read 154 total cholesterol, which is like, oh, that's great. That's fine. Everybody would be happy about that. I fasted for 18 hours and worked out, took it again the next day, and it went from 154 to 345. That's almost a 200-point swing in 18 hours. And so, if I would have taken it on the Monday, the doctor said, great. If I came in the next day, the doctor said, oh my God, get you to the cath lab, get you a cardiology consult stat, right? Because it changes so much. And so I'm more interested in longer term things. Like, if you look down and you got a big old gut, it ain't gonna disappear overnight. It's not gonna change in 18 hours. I mean, it's gonna take you months perhaps to do that. So those things are so more interesting to me. I mean, I check labs occasionally, mostly because other people are interested, not so much because I'm interested. I'm more interested in imaging. I'm interested in cardiac output. I'm interested in VO2 max and performance and body composition. Those are the things that are actually clinically relevant to me. What some blood marker might be on a random Tuesday is of less relevance. Now, if I'm sick, I mean, if I'm bleeding, I'd like to know what my hemoglobin is. I mean, there are things where it becomes part of the answer, but a lot of people just send me their random blood work, and I don't know anything about these people. What do you think? I'm like, I don't know. I mean, if that number's in or outside of the reference range, but that doesn't tell me enough to make any sort of intelligent decision. I think so many people are overly. I mean, you get people out there bragging about their blood work like it's some achievement. Some of it's just random. Oh yeah, well my number this, my sodium was perfect in the middle. Who cares, man? What can you do? I don't care. So I mean, and I said this on Rogan the first time, and he looked at me kind of strange, but I think enough people. I mean, I've looked at, gosh, tens of thousands of labs over my life, and very rarely do they do something that causes me to say you need to make a change in one direction or the other. And that's what I feel about most of them. Now, like I said, if you are sick and you're trying to figure something out, you can get some insight in that. But remember, why do we check blood? Well, because it's the easiest thing to check. It's what we have easy access to. It's not the ideal representative of what's going on in your body. If I want to know what's going on in my kidney, a kidney biopsy would be a hell of a lot more instructive. I mean, way more instructive. But again, a kidney biopsy comes with pain, expense, complications, so on and so forth. So blood is just a very weak proxy. I mean, it's kind of like checking the oil in your car to see what's going on, in the back seat. I mean, it's like, yeah, they're kind of in the same place, but how much does it tell me? I mean, it's not as good. I don't mean to say it's useless, but I think people over rely on that. And we have people that spend literally thousands upon thousands of dollars a year constantly checking their blood work and worrying about it in many cases. Probably, and it's like, well, I mean, I could take this or that supplement to bring my numbers in a certain range, but we don't even know how accurate those numbers are, really what they mean, and if it's in the right context. Because I will say that the blood work from a carnivore is going to be different than a blood work for somebody else. I mean, things like folate, things like B12, things like thyroid. There's differences, and if you don't understand the physiology and what's going on there, it's almost kind of useless.
Have you noticed any vitamins that carnivores are deficient of?
Well, it depends how you define that. I mean, serologically, is there blood levels low? Yeah, potentially. I mean, is there an actual clinical, like, yes, this is going on, this is a real issue? Like the biggest one I probably see is probably folate. Serum folate is often low, low normal, maybe below normal. Mine's low. Mine runs low normal. Do I have any signs or symptoms of folate deficiency? Absolutely not. I've got none. So do I care about it? Hell no, I don't care about it.
Gotcha.
I mean, I could take a vitamin supplement. I could eat a bunch of liver. I could eat some leafy greens, but to what end? To raise some number up that is having no literal impact on me day to day. So yeah, I mean, we can see that, but I don't really see, and again, I mean, there's a wide swath of people. I mean, there's some sick people, some really sick people that start on carnivore. Yeah, they may have some issues, but that's not. I mean, that's independent of what they're eating. I mean, that's the fact that they've sort of destroyed their body over a course of 2 or 3 or 4 decades, and now you're in a situation where, maybe we got some significant issues, and it's going to take some work to get it better.
And it's so crazy, Shawn, because when I hear people like you, Paul Saladino, even some of the things Rogan says, like, by no means am I a health and wellness professional, but the carnivore diet, it makes sense. It really does. When you look back at thousands and thousands of years of humans consuming this stuff, I mean, it seems complicated yet so simple all at the same time.
Well, I mean, why should nutrition be so damn hard? I mean, really, I mean, what other animal on the planet is struggling to figure out what they're supposed to eat? It's not hard, right? I mean, we are the only creature that gets, obese, literally, except for the animals we feed. When we feed our pets, we screw them up. You see all these fat cats and dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's no animal out there that's consulting an app and wearing a Fitbit and, reading a menu. I mean, they're just like, I eat what in the environment of which I am part of. And it's not to say that humans are necessarily strict omnivores. I mean, even in my book, I say humans are strict carnivores. Humans are omnivorous, right? We would, if 50,000 years ago, you and I were wandering around and somehow Twinkies were growing on trees, we'd probably eat the damn things because they taste good. Right? I mean, that's what we did. We were seeking energy and things that tasted pleasant. So yes, we'd have consumed some fruit when we had opportunity to it. But again, depending upon where you were, as I mentioned, there aren't peach trees in northern, Alaska in January. I mean, this stuff doesn't exist. What always exists is some sort of animal we can kill and eat. And I think that's what we utilize as a vast majority of our nutrition from the, if you want to start humanity back at Homo habilis 2.8 million years ago, or if you're a creationist and you want to say 6,000 years, whatever it is, ever since humans have walked this earth, we have eaten a lot of animal products. And, what happened, I mean, I guess from the evolutionary perspective, around about 80,000 years ago, we had enough human population, we caused a significant megafaunal die-off so that we didn't have access to big, giant elephants, which are full of fat, that we got all this fat and energy from. So then we had to rely on chasing smaller animals. So antelope. So now we have to develop bow and arrows and atlatls and stuff like that. So we have range technology. And so those animals tend to be leaner. And so when we're eating leaner meat, we just don't have as much energy. And where are we going to get the energy from now? Well, there's only so many bone marrow, and brains you can consume. You end up consuming more and more plant material. And so it seems to be that humans made a shift towards or were forced to make a shift due to a lack of food supply around 80,000 years ago. And so some of us have adapted to that pretty well. And clearly there's people that live on near vegetarian diets or vegetarian diets and live to 100 years of age. And I'm not saying that's not possible. We exist on a spectrum. But to say that we have to have grains in our diet to be healthy, or we have to eat fruit on our diet to be healthy, is just complete nonsense as far as I'm concerned. There's concerns around, oh, well, if you don't eat carbs, you're going to have this a gluconeogenesis, which occurs, which is stressful, right? We hear that all the time. You hear these people on the repeat people crowd saying this stuff. Well, the reality is gluconeogenesis occurs at a significant rate regardless of what we're eating. In fact, there was a nice study that came out in I want to say it was maybe 2014, where they looked at gluconeogenesis in people with 2% carb versus 75% carbohydrate. And the difference was almost nothing. It was a tiny amount difference. So, I mean, this whole thought that, oh, you're relying on gluconeogenesis and it's so stressful, complete nonsense. So you can certainly do very well on a low carb or even a carb-free diet.
Shawn, there's also a lot of people that talk about how eating carnivore is super expensive. What would you say to those people, and what are some of the best ways or most affordable ways to eat carnivore?
Well, I mean, it can be expensive. If you're eating prime filet mignon every night, yeah, of course it's going to be that, but it doesn't have to be that. In fact, there's many people. In fact, I think a high percentage of people actually find they spend less money on carnivore because they're just not eating all the extra crap. I mean, they're not taking all the supplements and doing all the condiments and all the crap that gets thrown away. And and so like if you just eat ground beef and eggs, I mean, it doesn't have to be grass-finished ground. Grain-finished ground beef you can find in a tube for $4 a pound still. That's not expensive. I mean, many people can eat this diet for, $6, $7 a day. You compare that. I mean, that's a cup of coffee at Starbucks. I don't drink coffee, but I suspect that's about the same price as that. So many people actually save money on this. Now, like I said, if you want to eat, prime steaks every day, it's going to be expensive. But no, the other things, you think about, well, what if I'm not needing all these medications anymore? What if I don't need to take all these supplements? What if I don't have all these additional costs, all these things that I throw away? How many times have you gone to the store and bought a thing of fruits and vegetables, maybe they're organic, strawberries, and you get in there 3 days later, and it's got mold all over it, and you got to throw the hell damn thing out.
Disgusting.
Yeah, so it's like, that's a waste of money. And the other thing is, you think about it, this is funny because there's a nice study done in 1978 looking at high fiber versus low fiber diets. And what they found is people on a high fiber diet, they literally, in their stool, they're pooping out twice as much protein, twice as much fat, and twice as much carbohydrate. So again, when you're eating that stuff, you're literally putting half of it in the toilet, or not half, but a significant percent of it goes in the toilet. That is not a very efficient strategy for obtaining nutrition. So not only do you need to eat less, you get more nutrition absorbed. And, it's interesting, in the course of all of the, creation, every animal that's ever been on the planet, whether it's crawled or swam or flown, about 85% of them have been carnivorous. And the reason for that is it is so much more efficient. You think about it. If I have to build a brick house and I have straw and mud here and I've got bricks here, using the bricks is going to be a lot quicker, right? And that's the same thing. I'm building animal cells out of animal cell ingredients. And if I got a lot of animal cells, literally the essential amino acids in the perfect ratios, it's not coincidence that that's going on. It's because that's what we consumed over a long period of time. Whereas eating plants, it's less efficient. You literally have to, extract what you want, get rid of what you don't need. I mean, you're literally, that's why, you when you consume a high fiber plant-based diet, you make 6 times as much poop because it's all crap you can't use. I mean, literally crap you can't use that's going out of you. Whereas meat is highly absorbed. It's like, totally absorbed. When's the last time you saw a piece of steak floating around in the toilet? That you didn't puke. I mean, you don't poop out steak, but you poop out corn and whatever, collard green, whatever. I mean, you see that stuff. It doesn't get digested. So, I mean, it's more efficient to do meat.
That's a great point.
Go ahead, Mary.
No, that's a great point. You don't, like you said, you see corn, you see popcorn, you see whatever the hell else, but steak, never.
If you did, you better go to the doctor because there's something wrong.
Shawn, totally understand that you're super busy and we got to get going here soon, but I got to ask you about your fitness routine. I mean, some of the stuff you're posting on Instagram is iron. You're just the Hulk. I mean, you're totally a unit. You're lifting 600, 700 pounds. Tell us about what you're working on in your weight room.
Well, I mean, I've literally been lifting weights for 45 years, and I've never taken more than a week off in that entire time. So I'm very consistent. So I don't want to give any of the impression that you eat a carnivore diet and magically you become strong and fit, and you got to put the work in. I like doing that. I'm very competitive. You know, I've set world records in a number of sports and won several world championships in various different sports. Some of the things I'm working on, you know, right now, I've got some rowing world records that I'm in the process of breaking. I've broken one of them. I've got three more I'd like to break. You know, when I turn 60, which I turned 60 in 2 years, I've got some sort of goals. One, I'd like to dunk a basketball, which I've done before. I mean, I'm 6'5", so people, oh, you're 6'5", but you know, when you get to be 60, it's harder to jump. Just trust me on that. But you can get it back. I think you can, and I think diet is part of that, but also the right smart training to get there. A lot of plyometrics and whatnot. And then, you know, in addition to that, I like to still be able to pull 600 pounds at 60, which is pretty, you know, I mean, it's pretty remarkable.
It's remarkable,
I mean,
totally.
these are things I've done. I've all done all these things in my life at some point, but again, 60 is a different sort of, you know, deal. Run a sub 6 minute mile, which is probably the easiest for the tasks I have in front of me. A 400 under 60 seconds and a 13-second 100. Those are all things, like I said, I've done at some point in my life, but you know, doing them together at the same time at a body weight of I'll probably be about, I don't know, about 240 when I do that, which will be pretty remarkable for a 60-year-old dude. So yeah,
agree.
like I said, that's what I'm working on. So you'll see me doing a lot of bouncing around. And I think that's something that's interesting as we look at aging athletes. You know, there's a lot of strong guys that are old, you know, strong 60, 70-year-old dudes are still putting up some pretty good weight. There's a lot of people with good endurance. You know, there's marathon runners and ultra marathon runners in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. Very few of them are what I would call springy, where they're athletic, where they can jump and do things like that, because we lose that. That's one of the hardest things to maintain. Now, you know, I've got a strategy on how to do that, and I'll talk more about it as I develop success on that. But I think there's things you can do to mitigate that. And I think that's going to be the next frontier when it comes to, you know, healthy aging. You know, and you know, a lot of people, you know, we live in a time where we have a lot of wealth and free time and disposable income, and what inevitably happens, anybody who's like some rich dude wants to live forever. Inevitably, I want to live forever. Life's pretty good. I don't want it to stop. So, you know, it's like, what do you do? Well, you listen to like guys like Brian Johnson, who he's mad. You know, he's coming out with his nonsense. Oh, I'm aging at a super low rate with some bullshit test. Some blood test told you that, dude. How do you know it's even accurate, right? Well, because I said so, or so and so said so. Well, my interest is in what can you physically do. You know, if you're aging at a slow rate, then you should be able to be out there playing basketball with 20-year-olds, right? I mean, that to me is indicative of true, you know, not aging in a rapid sense, so to speak. So that's something that I hope to, you know, hopefully I can demonstrate. You know, I'm like I said, I'm a guy that tries not to just talk the talk, but also walk the walk. So
Nice.
I don't want to run my mouth too much until I can put up. You know, I mean, I've put up a lot of things over the years. You know, like I said, I've usually, as you see me on social media, I do that intentionally just to show, hey, this is possible at an older age, but also that I'm not just a talking head that doesn't actually do anything.
Shawn, something I think that needs to be kind of brought up is how you see tons of musicians in their 80s that are still touring and going strong. Rolling Stones, for example, Bob Dylan, Buddy Guy. What do you think that has? How does that correlate to living longer?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, like Mick Jagger's a classic. I mean, a guy's still, for an 80-year-old guy, he's got it. He's getting after it still. You know, I mean, you know, and you got the Rolling Stones. That's such a, I mean, they're like Keith Richards. I mean, that guy's like a chemistry experiment, you know, drug experiment. I mean, some of it is just is luck, but I mean, also I think it is just purpose. You know, if you retire at 65 and sit your ass on the couch and watch ESPN the rest of your life, you ain't gonna. I mean, that you might as well. I mean, you know, you're already waiting to die, and so I think part of it is just having a purpose. And you know, obviously, I mean, these guys are incredibly wealthy and have access and resources to, you know, things that most people don't have access to. So there's some of that for sure. But I think, you know, I mean, it's like, what is my purpose in life? And if your purpose in life is to wait for the next Netflix special, that's a problem. I mean, you're not going to be around long. I mean, so I mean, I think that's as much as anything, to be honest.
I think that makes
So,
a lot of sense.
so Shawn, I'm 24 years old. Evan's 22, soon to be 23. what advice would you give to not only us, but other 20 somethings or even 30 somethings as they kind of get older and feel themselves getting older?
Well, I mean, obviously 22, it's kind of funny. I imagine if I could transport myself back in time and talk to myself when I was your guys' age, I probably would have said, yeah, get out of here, old man. I'm ignoring you. It's hard, to say that thing. But I mean, I think there's some things you can do. I mean, get strong while you're young, because then it's a lot easier just to maintain it. I got very strong as a 20-year-old, 30-year-old. I was pretty friggin' strong. I mean, I'm still strong, dude, but I mean, that was important. I think one thing you have to realize is that you cannot outsource your health to anyone else. I mean, I don't care if it's a doctor and it's the nicest guy in the world and cares a lot about you. A doctor will never have the skin in the game that you do. And so you've got to really be your own advocate. You've got to educate yourself. You've got to not be afraid to experiment with things. I mean, obviously the whole YOLO thing is out, you only live once type of attitude where, I mean, think about consistently doing the right things. I mean, the hardest thing I've had, even at this age, is forcing myself to sleep. Because it's, like I said, there's a lot of things going on. You got partying on the weekend, you're staying out. I mean, try and develop as much as you can, as frequently as you can. Now, obviously there's going to be exceptions. A good routine, where you eat well, you sleep well, you minimize, you don't smoke, you minimize drinking. You seek to improve yourself, because at some point you're either going to get really, really sick where you can't do it and you've dug yourself a hole so deep you'll never get out of, or, you're going to come to a point where, you realize that you should have been doing this 10 years ago. I mean, like I said, I mean, we can all look back in hindsight and say, yeah, I should have done this. But I think, don't sell yourself short for sure. I mean, there's a lot of people that will just sort of accept mediocrity. And I think that's a disaster. I mean, and particularly today, mediocrity today is like abysmally awful 100 years ago, because we've got such a society of so many people that are just, it's ridiculous for me when I walk around and I see guys your age that are just like so damn out of shape, and physically and mentally, because and the mental side is attached to the physical side. So if you treat your body like a trash can and you get all flabby and fat and weak, your brain doesn't work as well. I mean, you're literally have changed your brain, and you've taken this sort of mindset on that's going to it's just going to put you in this negative cycle, or this vicious negative cycle. So, don't outsource your health. Just build in the habits now. I mean, this is when, arguably even in your teens, but teens, 20s, the patterns you are laying down right now will be with you the rest of your life. And so if your pattern right now is to not sleep and eat garbage all day, you're probably going to be doing that 20, 30 years from now. And then you're going to wake up one day and you're going to be diabetic, and you're going to be having heart disease, maybe have a stroke, you'll be impotent. It's not fun. So fix that stuff now, and just kind of dedicate, it doesn't have to be your whole identity, your whole life, but just, it's just like brushing your teeth, man. You just do it. You just do the right thing, and you don't have to wait for motivation, as my friend Jocko Willink says. If you wait for motivation, that may come around once or twice a year. So you just gotta build the habits and just grind and just keep doing it.
And you're a great example of it yourself. Like I said earlier, your social media is so good, whether it be trolling vegans or lifting 700 pounds. But Shawn, thank you so much for coming on our show. Why don't you let everyone know where they could find you, whether it be your website, social media, whatever you have going on?
Sure. So first of all, I'd like to talk about Revero.com. If you are sick, you live in all 50 states, you're sick, go to Revero.com, hop on our waiting list. We're taking patients, right now. So that'll help you to get off, if you need support. My social media, Instagram, probably my biggest account right now, Shawn Baker, ShawnBaker 1967. So Shawn Baker 1967. I've got a YouTube channel at Shawn Baker MD. I'm on TikTok, Shawn Baker MD. And I'm on, what's the other one? X or Twitter. Yep. That's S Baker MD. And so those are where you can find me.
Awesome. Shawn, thank you so much, man. We appreciate you and everything you're doing. Love it.
Appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity, guys. Thanks. Appreciate it.